Well, I don't know about you folks, but I am surely enjoying the 40th anniversary. So right now we are in the spirit of St. Louis, and this that I'm looking into, that kind of like little dark window, I was trying to see if you could see anything with it when it was closed, but that's a periscope. And when this was designed, there was an employee at the aircraft factory that I guess the rumor is he worked on submarines and he had put that in, but it was designed with the help of Charles Lindbergh. So this is the Spirit of St. Louis, a very historic aircraft, and I am going to use it to cross the English Channel. Now, that is not what this plane is famous for. The English Channel was first crossed, well, the first crossing was actually in a balloon, but the first crossing by aircraft was from France to England, and that was on the 25th of July in 1909, which is actually the first year of the Lincoln Head penny, in case you're curious. And it was Louis Blériot, and he flew across with the Blériot 11. It was constructed of hardwood, and it was a simple steel wire-braced wooden box girder. The forward half was enclosed by a rubberized waterproof fabric, and just the forward half. If you look at the pictures of this, you can see the back end of it was just wide open frame, and so most of it was. And it was built with the help of a motorbike manufacturer, and that's where the 3-cylinder partial radial engine came from. Yeah, 3-cylinder partial radial. I love it. It was a walnut propeller, laminated walnut. It was connected directly to the crankshaft. And it was all, the engine propeller obviously all positioned in front of the design, which was a little bit different than what they had been seeing with like the Wright Flyer and so forth. Wings, the Curtiss Flyer too. I think the Curtiss Wright Flyer was also props in the back. Wings were very thin and deeply arched, very, very broad. No aileron flaps on this aircraft, on the Blériot, I mean, not on the Spirit. And so it all started with Lord Northcliffe, and he was preoccupied with advancing aviation. Not so much the balloons, but the aircraft in particular. He was really interested in airplane development. So he offered a whole lot of different cash prizes to pioneer pilots who could achieve first, basically. So the first one to do this, the first one to do that, and so forth. And one of those was the first non-stop channel crossing by airplane, and it had a cash prize of £1,000, which would be about 120,000, I think now. And there was a gentleman from Paris, Parisian Hubert Latham. He first attempted it in his Antoinette, but he actually had to land on the sea because his engine failed. Yet that was also a first because it was the first time that a sea landing had been made by an airplane. So in a way, he did accomplish a first, just not the one he set out to do. But it was Louis Blériot who set out around 4:45 a.m., somewhere approximately. It was very early. Large crowd there to wave him off. It was just after sunrise, but I think it was like 4:40 or 4:50 in the morning. And that was a condition of the record attempt, is that the flight had to start just after sunrise. Now, he didn't fly with a compass because he said he was poor at navigation. He actually just, I guess, was going to wing it. I don't know. Follow the sun? I'm not sure what his plan was. But he was flying at first by following a ship. And then at one point, about halfway across, the visibility, about halfway across, the visibility really got bad. And in his memoirs, and in his recollections of the flight, he wrote, "For about 10 minutes I was on my own, isolated, lost in the middle of the foaming sea, seeing no point on the horizon, perceiving no boat. Also, my eyes were fixed on the level of fuel consumption. These 10 minutes seemed long, and truly I was happy to glimpse the English coast. I headed for this white mountain, but was caught in the wind and the mist. I could no longer see Dover. I could see 3 boats. They seemed to be heading to a port. I followed them calmly. The wind got even stronger. A break in the coast appeared to my right just before Dover Castle. I was madly happy. I rushed for it. I was above ground." So he circled twice, and then, satisfied with the landing area, he dropped onto a downward slope of North Fall Meadow, where he actually broke his undercarriage and his propeller snapped. His wheels and his propeller snapped them right off, and it was about 5:12 a.m. So it took him about 30 plus minutes, just over 30 minutes, to cross the 24-mile distance. Now, he picked a spot on the map where the 2 continents were a lot closer, not 2 continents, but the 2 lands were much closer to each other. Where I'm flying, it's probably about twice. No, maybe not quite twice. Maybe like a little less than twice as long. So my flight's probably going to be about 40 minutes. And so 10 minutes longer than his, approximately. Yeah, and that was it. That really made him his fortunes. After that, he started receiving all kinds of orders for his aircraft. So a little bit about the Spirit itself. The Spirit of St. Louis was known originally as Ryan NYP. And that wasn't its registration number, that's the name, that's what it was known as, Ryan NYP. The registration at that time was NTAC XTAC 211. And then it became the Spirit of St. Louis. And it was known because it accomplished something truly astounding for the time. 1927, we're talking here, folks, 1927. He flew a non-stop solo flight across the Atlantic Ocean. Now, I'm flying across the English Channel, and it makes me nervous just not seeing land as it is now. I can see some of the English coast still behind me, but at some point here, we're not going to see anything for quite a while. We're not going to see England or France. We're going to see ocean. And this is a 40-minute flight, maybe? His was over 33 hours. 33 hours, 3,600 miles in this aircraft, in a cramped little cabin where he could not straighten his legs. There is no room in here to stretch your legs. That's how cramped this cabin is. Everything was given over to being able to carry the fuel, because obviously you can't run out of fuel in the middle of the ocean. And if you're crossing the Atlantic Ocean, even if you had to ditch it, how in the world would you ever... Even if you had to ditch it, how in the world would you ever get rescued, right? I mean, you're not going to. Not too likely anyways. So it was a single engine monoplane, and it was designed by Ryan Airlines, which is why it was known as Ryan NYP. It was renamed the Spirit of St. Louis in honor of the St. Louis Racquet Club, which was the supporters of Charles Lindbergh. So that's why they named it the Spirit of St. Louis. And kind of funny, right? Named after the supporters from a racket club. So it was very closely based on their mail plane, the Ryan M2. The biggest difference being that the NYP has a 4,000 mile range. Gosh, can you imagine that? 4,000 miles in this thing? Wow. Yeah, still can't imagine that. So it was designed and built specifically to compete for the prize for a non-stop flight between New York and Paris. That really is what it was built for. It was built in just about 60 days, and Lindbergh was instrumental in a lot of the design, which you could understand because he was the one that was going to be flying it. Now, he was a U.S. airmail pilot, so he's very familiar with a lot of the aircraft that were available at the time, and so he had a lot of experience. He wasn't new to the game, let's say that. Now, there was thought, of course, at some point about multiple engines. Charles Lindbergh felt that they actually increased the risk of failure. He also felt the single engine would give much better range. You'd have much better fuel efficiency. And so for that time, it was really one of the most advanced and aerodynamic aircraft. So really an incredible accomplishment. It had a fuel capacity of 450 gallons. That's almost 3,000 pounds, folks. 2,700 pounds of fuel in this aircraft. So there's 5 tanks, a forward tank, a main tank, and 3 wing tanks. So the struts for the landing gear actually had to be modified just to handle the weight of the fuel. So, and the main tank and the forward fuel tank are sitting right here in front of us. That's why we have no windshield. That's why we have nothing here. The firewall is actually the oil tank. So right here directly in front of us is the oil tank. That's our firewall. And then in front of that is the main tank and the forward fuel tank. They were placed this way to help with the center of gravity, and also to help if there's an accident to prevent the pilot from being crushed between the tank and the engine. If the tank was behind me or behind the pilot and the engine, you'd get crushed between them. So that's the way it was designed, that's the way it was set up. Lindbergh was quite accustomed to the open cockpit aircraft at the time, where if you were flying solo, you sat in the back seat, and if you were flying mail, you had the front seat loaded up with mail bags and sacks of mail. So he probably didn't have much of a forward view in those aircraft anyways, and was probably quite used to doing exactly what I'm doing, leaning out the window, using the horizon, keeping the wings level to the horizon. And so that's really critical for this flight. And the instruments, you got to use these instruments. Now, the periscope is nice, but really its main purpose is just when you're down low, flying low altitude, where you might hit ship masts or trees, you know, things like that, buildings and so forth. You know, other than that, you can't really see much here. In the periscope, when you're flying like this, I mean, what are you seeing? You're seeing horizon. So it's fun to look out. I'm enjoying looking out of it because it's nostalgic. But in all reality, it would probably have been closed as Charles Lindbergh was flying across for most of the flight. I mean, why keep it open? It adds drag for one thing. Not a lot, but it's got to be adding some. And you know what? Yeah, I can tell my horizon is level, but I can also tell that looking left and right. So I'm not sure how much he actually would have used it until he got close to the land anyways. So the main compass mounted in the back of me here, and Lindbergh, he actually used a mirror from a makeup case, and he had it mounted to the ceiling. Now this is what they say. I don't know if this is true, but supposedly it was mounted to the ceiling with chewing gum. So I don't know. Interesting stuff, some of the facts you hear in stories. Can you imagine 33 hours, 33 and a half hours like this? No radio or anything, nothing to listen to. What in the world did he keep his mind occupied with? He's very interesting. I wonder if he talks about it in his biography. You know, did he like try and remember books? Did he try and remember songs? Words? What did he try? How did he keep himself for 33 hours? How did he keep his mind from just zoning out completely? I don't know. Amazing. So something else that was new at the time is this guy here to the right of the window there, the Pioneer Compass. The Pioneer Compass was an earth inductor compass. And earth inductor, it means that it uses electromagnetic induction to determine. So it uses an electrical generator, and it was mounted in here so that you can have more accurate navigation. Now you can see I'm adjusting it down here, and what that does, it's almost like a VOR line or an ILS line, because you notice my needle, the needle here is either L, R, or center. Sound familiar? So as I'm heading to the right, because my needle's to the left, which means I'm to the left of that heading, I don't have to look up at the compass. I can just go over here and I can see as long as I'm pointing to that, then I'm on my course. And so that is the Pioneer Earth Inductor Compass. Neat technology for the day, really neat. I got to see this aircraft. It's hanging in the Smithsonian Air Museum in Washington, and I actually did get to see it. It's hanging up there, and I got to tell you, a lot of the aircraft that's in that place is pretty amazing and awe-inspiring. But to me, I think this was probably the one that really struck me as I guess it was the most awesome, because just the facts behind it, you know, flying across the Atlantic Ocean, I mean, my goodness, 33 hours sitting in this thing, not being able, oh wow, yeah, you can see the wind is definitely picked up. I didn't even notice it. When we left England, the ocean was smooth as glass. It's kind of funny because that actually happened about halfway, or at least partway across, for Louis Blériot. He also ran into some wind partway across, so maybe it'll get windier as we get closer to France. But just think about it, 33 hours, oh, excuse me, I'm sorry, in a very cramped cockpit that was so small that he could not stretch his legs. Now, I've sat for a long time. I've actually flown for a long time. When I flew for DC Airlines, which I'm hoping I can do again now because we have a DC-3, yes, gotta start adding more hours to my DC-3 Airlines logs. I am pilot number 504, DC Airlines. If you like to fly DC Airlines, it's a great group to belong to. And I believe it's still active. But anyways, we flew historic flights and recreations of different flights. And one of them one time was a rescue mission down to South America. And I flew it. And if I remember, we started in, I think, around New York, flew to Florida, and then from there flew to South America. And it wasn't 33 hours, but it was a long time. You know, when I fly those flights, I don't just put it on autopilot. This was a DC-3 anyways, you know, not the most reliable autopilots. But I don't just put it on autopilot and then go to work and check in on it every once in a while. I sat there and I flew it. Now, yes, I would have put it on autopilot to get up and eat, possibly paused it to eat, but most likely not. Most likely I would have gotten food and sat back down. Same thing with using the restroom. I would have not paused it, I would have trimmed it and let it fly. But I think that was maybe 15 or 16 hours. I can't remember, but I did fly that. So it was an awful long flight at a flight sim. And that was going back to 1997, 98, I think, somewhere around there, 97, 98. So there was, you know, we didn't have all the great peripherals we have now. There was definitely no VR. But it was still awesome, and I did it, and I accomplished it. So, and I, you know, it's not unusual for me to get into DC-3 and fly a 3-hour flight. We did the TWA circuit, I think, 1933, 1934. I believe those are the flight schedules that DC-3 Airlines flies. The TWA, 1933 and 1934, East Coast and to West Coast and back, multiple legs, and so that was also part of it, you know, flying a leg and then either taking off again in an hour or 3 hours or overnight and then going back the next day to fly the second leg. Does that land? I think we might be seeing some land up here, folks. I think I'm seeing, I didn't even notice, I'm so busy talking about the history of the aircraft and keeping level here. But yeah, I do believe we are seeing the coast of France. Awesome. And we're about, what, 31, 32 minutes into the flight, looking at the clock over here. Yeah, I'd say about 32 minutes into the flight at this point, somewhere around there. And so we should have about 10 more minutes maybe and we'll be over France. Now, I haven't really noticed it, but I know that the original Spirit of St. Louis had a negatively stable design. And it had to do with the control surfaces being the original Brian M2 design, and they weren't altered because they were racing to get this plane done in time for the competition. And what that means, negatively stable, is that the aircraft could just randomly pitch, yaw, or roll. So, you know, just there's random flight characteristics that can happen when you have a negatively stable aircraft. Now, I think I read earlier, because I was doing a lot of research on the aircraft in anticipation for the flight and the video, and I'll double check this, but if I remember correctly, Lindbergh actually liked the negatively stable design. Now, whether or not this is accurate, whether or not it's true, or whether or not it was deliberately done for this purpose, but I think he wrote somewhere in his recollections that these particular random, unanticipated movements helped keep him awake. They helped him fight fatigue and sleep, you know, so, and I guess I could kind of understand that because you really can't relax with this plane, and I've tried that a couple of times, and it's true. I mean, there's really not a whole lot in here for trim, okay? No aileron, rudder, and elevator trim going on in this aircraft here. So you really have to constantly stay up on your toes with this. And the wicker seat is very, very uncomfortable to sit in for a long time. I couldn't even imagine it. I'm glad I'm not actually sitting in a wicker seat right now. So, yeah, so there was no radio at all. The fuselage was a treated fabric over metal tubes. The frame was a metal tube frame. So, anything at all to save weight. Supposedly he even cut the top and bottom off his maps. You know, I guess like the top and bottom borders or the areas of the map he didn't need. I mean, that's pretty serious, isn't it? You cut your map up, pieces of your map off to save weight. I mean, how much weight would that actually have added? That's funny. So, oh, and another really interesting. Oh yeah, we're looking good here. Looking good. Another really interesting fact is regarding a swastika. Now, the swastika is known by most people as a symbol of the Nazi Party. Nazi Party. And originally that's not what it was. The Nazis took it over, but it was not their symbol. It was around a long, long time before then. And the left-facing swastika was actually a good luck symbol. And the original propeller spinner of the Spirit of St. Louis actually had that painted inside of it. And that wasn't unusual because it was considered a good luck symbol for aviators. And so the original spinner had a left-facing Indian-style swastika painted on it, along with the names of all the Ryan aircraft employees that worked on the Spirit of St. Louis. And it was supposed to be for good luck prior to the crossing. However, they discovered prior to the crossing that that propeller spinner had a crack in it, and so it had to be replaced for the, let's see, where are we going to land here? Gotta find a nice spot to land. I'm not looking for an airstrip. I'm going to find myself a spot to land in a field. I think it's a little bit more authentic to what I'm trying to accomplish anyways with this flight. But yeah, the propeller spinner was cracked, so they ended up having to change it. That is also, I believe, in the Air Museum. I think I saw it there. I remember seeing either it or a picture of it, but I believe that's also in the museum as well. So I'm not sure where in particular we're flying over right now. Most of you younger generation won't know about stamps and stamp collections, but that was something that was quite popular. It really was an incredibly fun and interesting hobby. I know people like stamps. Wow, why? What's exciting about that? But a lot of it was what the stamps commemorated, not so much the stamps themselves. And some of it was where the stamps had been. You know, it was always nice to have a non-canceled stamp, but it was also neat to see a stamp that came from Egypt. I mean, nowadays that's not such a big deal. But you know what? 40 years ago, 50 years ago, it was still a pretty big deal to see a postmark from someplace overseas like that. And the stamps were really neat. And I do remember having the 10-cent Spirit of St. Louis stamp in my collection. And it seems to me there was a misprint stamp regarding the Spirit of St. Louis, or I may be thinking of another aircraft, but it seems to me that there was one where there were some that were misprinted, where the aircraft was upside down, and I don't remember if it was the Spirit of St. Louis or another aircraft, but obviously I didn't have that one. I would be a billionaire now and retired. No, I probably would have spent it all by now on flight sim. But yeah, but I do remember the stamp. I can almost picture it. It was like a bluish ink. I miss my stamp collection. Whatever happened to that? Funny thinking about stuff from 50 plus years ago and where it could be now. Then of course Charles Lindbergh, I mean, he had his own issues, right? In, you know, the Lindbergh story where his child, Charles Jr., was kidnapped and murdered. And at that point, that was called the crime of the century. Can you imagine now? I mean, now it'd barely even make the newspaper, for goodness sakes, and it's so sad. But yeah, kidnapping up till then wasn't a federal crime, believe it or not. It was this case that made it a federal crime. When crossing a state line, I should say, because that's what had happened. And yeah, the Lindberghs, they kind of lost it after that. They went into exile and all kinds of things. Lindbergh came back. He didn't do any active duty, but I know that he supported a lot of different things. But what a terrible thing, huh? Having a child kidnapped and murdered. His firstborn too. His first kid. The Lindbergh baby, very, very famous. That's, I guess, one time when he probably didn't feel that he deserved his nickname of Lucky Lindy. Anyhow, let me pay attention here about landing. See if we can put this thing down. Yeah. Kind of tough there. I probably should have circled more. I should have circled at least twice, I think. There's a lot of trees around here. But hey, it's my first flight in the spirit of St. Louis, and it was great. Thanks for watching, everyone. See you in the sky. Hope you're enjoying the 40th. I know I am.